the Daily Derech. We are walking the path of holiness.
Hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Marcus Rubenstein. Welcome to the Daily Derech, a special project of exploring Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, and the Rabbinical Assembly. Today is the third day after Shabbat Kodesh, the 28th of Adar, 5786, corresponding in the secular calendar to Tuesday, March 17th, 2026. We will read Parashat Vayikra this coming Shabbat, and we are 15 days from Pesach. Let's begin. Let's now turn to Me'am Loez on the Parsha. We're still on Parashat Vayikra, and we're going to still be talking about this word Vayikra. God called out to Moses. And I know if you were listening in our previous episodes this week, which if you're not, totally okay, we spoke about this word a lot, but we're going to give another interpretation of this term. And this one specifically has to do with a comparison between Moshe Rabbeinu and Bilam. Bilam was a infamous sorcerer / warlock who was lived during the time when the Jewish people were crossing the desert, crossing the Sinai, and specifically was hired in the book of Numbers to curse the Jewish people by Balak, the king of Moab. Now, the thing that's always been perplexing about this weird sorcerer, warlock kind of guy named Bilam is he seems to have access to God's powers in some sort of strange way, that somehow he's able to tap in to God's powers. And that always has been confusing to Jewish scholars. How can this sort of evil person who curses people somehow have secret access to God's power? And I think in some ways the parable that is about to be told is in some ways response to that. Because we see that God both calls out and speaks with Bilam, and God calls out to Moshe. So what's the difference between their two relationships? And with this, there was a parable originally told by Rabbi Eliezer in the Midrash and in the Talmud about a leper. Well, a leper who was visiting a king. He said, it's like a leper who comes to the king's palace and begins to bang on the door, demanding that it be opened because he wants to come in. The king hears him and says, "Who is banging on my door?" "There is a leper at the door," says his men. The king says, "If I send someone to tell him not to come into the palace, the leper will not listen. He will force his way in and pollute and defile my children. Therefore, it is better for me to get up from my throne. I will go to the entrance of the palace and I will chase him away so he will not dare come in." Now, you have to understand, some people might have compassion here on the leper, which I don't blame you to have compassion. But you have to understand, through the Torah perspective, leprosy is not just some disease or even just a bad disease, but it's a disease that comes from a specific transgression, a transgression of lashon hara, or slandering or speaking badly about somebody else. In that, the crime, in the punishment for that crime, according to the Torah and according to our rabbis, is leprosy. And so this, I think, assumes it's not just a sick person, otherwise this king's being pretty nasty to him, but someone who is not a good person, out to do no good. And so the way the king responds to him and says, well, I know this person's not going to listen to anybody else. So I myself have to go, but I'm not going to be nice to him. I'm going to push him out. I'm not going to be good to him. So the only reason I'm talking to him is to sort of prevent damage to the kingdom and push him away from myself. And that is opposite than when the friend of the king comes. So here what happens when the friend of the king comes. The opposite is true when a king's friend comes. When the king asks who is knocking at the gate, his people tell him that it is his friend. The king says, if this is my dear friend, I do not want anyone else to call him. I want to call him with my own voice because I cherish him. And this is, of course, exactly what happens with a friend. That of course, the king is excited now in a positive way that the friend is here, and also equally wants to go meet the friend, but for a very different purpose, to invite the friend in, to be kind to the friend. It's because he's excited. The king is excited that the friend is here. And so too is the same, of course, with Bilam and Moshe. God knows he has to deal with Bilam, but it's in order to push Bilam away. It's not in a friendly way. It's actually to push Bilam away. While in the case of Moshe, God's calling out to Moshe is actually this thing of endearment, that it's God and God's self who wants to be in relationship with Moshe. And what's the difference? I mean, what's the difference in Bilam and Moshe? How do we know if we're Bilam or Moshe? And I think pretty simply, it comes from the fact that when Moshe comes to speak to God, it's never just on his own behalf or to make some kind of in this world gain of some sort, but rather to fulfill God's will, to serve Hashem, to serve God. If Moshe came to God just for himself, I don't know if God would be so happy to see him. And Bilam was always coming for himself, always to just do Bilam's bidding. And I think this is a really good example for all of us of what, when we come to God, do we come to God in a context of, God, what are you going to do for me today? Or do we come from a context of, I want to serve you, God. I want to be in relationship with you. I want to be there for you. And so let's be in relationship together. Those things are very different. Every once in a while, a friend asks for things from their friend, or a subject asks something from their king who's loyal, but the king is much more willing to listen and more friendly and has a better relationship with the person when he knows that the friend is always out to do the king's will or the other friend's will. And hopefully it's in the case too when we come in prayer to God. Let's now turn to the Mishnah Torah. We're still going to continue learning the Mishnah Torah on the laws of Pesach. Today we're going to learn chapter 3, halacha 7, and halacha 8 in the Mishnah Torah. The main topic that's going to be spoken about today in the Mishnah Torah is this idea of bitul chametz, or nullifying chametz. How do we actually do it, and what is it? Well, so far we've spoken a lot of things about chametz. We know that we have to search for chametz on the 14th of Nisan, on the night before the Seder, and so we know we have to search by candlelight during that night. We know that we have to destroy chametz, right? We talked about the destruction of chametz and getting rid of the chametz actually in a physical way. But what about nullification of chametz itself? So this is another thing that needs to be done. We start, as I said, on the evening of the 14th by searching for chametz. And hopefully before then we've cleaned up the house and got all of the chametz out of the house that we can do. And then we search and just make sure there's nothing else remaining. And then by the next morning, what actually occurs is that really what we need to do is first we need to burn the chametz. We need to first destroy the chametz. And this should happen before the beginning of the 6th hour. Okay, so this is very important, right? Before the beginning of the 6th hour. Why before the beginning of the 6th hour? Well, we've done this on previous episodes, but in case you didn't listen, here it is again. We understand that chametz is forbidden by the Torah at the beginning of the 7th hour of the day. So let's say, and Judaism counts light and counts the hours by daylight. So the 7th hour, the beginning of the 7th hour of the day would be something like afternoon, right? After the noon hour. And the reason is that chametz is forbidden after noon, right? The reason is because that is the time when the Korban Pesach, the lamb offering, was offered. And we know, according to the Torah, that we can't have chametz around when we are offering the Korban Pesach. Now, according to the rabbis, they first put a fence around this and moved this a whole entire hour back just to keep far away from this. And in terms of eating chametz itself, not just not benefiting it, but just eating it, we actually can't eat chametz even an hour before that either as an extra rabbinical offense. So what I'm saying to you here, so at 10 o'clock, let's say if all the halachic hours work out correctly, 10 o'clock would be the time when you can't eat chametz any longer. 11 o'clock would be the time when you no longer can benefit from chametz as well as not eat it. And then according to the rabbis, and then at noon, actually according to the Torah itself, it is forbidden to both benefit and eat chametz. So when are we supposed to burn the chametz? We're supposed to burn the chametz before the 6th hour. So what I mean by that is before 11 o'clock, if the hours worked out right, okay? Just to make it simple. So at least before 11 o'clock, before the second rabbinical fence here. And then after we burn the chametz, either by tearing it apart, stepping on it, burning it, all the different ways we could possibly do this, there's a next step we have to do. We have to do what's called bitul chametz, nullification of the chametz. And that is done through a verbal declaration, which in English translates to all chametz which is in my possession that I have not seen. Behold, it is nullified and must be considered as dust. Many people know this from the Aramaic, kol chamira vechamira, which in Aramaic means every kind of chametz, every kind of thing, right? And oftentimes when we see this printed in a siddur, it's printed in Aramaic. And the reason is because that's actually the spoken language of the rabbis during the Talmud. So that's the text we see in the Talmud. And what that's trying to tell us is that this declaration needs to be said in a language that everybody understands. So for the rabbis, that was Aramaic. But for us, I think it's really important that, many people might try to say this Aramaic in transliteration or just say it because it's what's written in the Siddur, but they have no idea what it means. According to the halacha here, you actually do not do nullification of chametz unless you say it in a language you understand. So, of course, English would be the best. If you understand Hebrew, wonderful. And if you understand the words in Aramaic, which is okay, it's possible that you understand, then fine, you could say it in Aramaic. The easiest thing to do, I think, for Americans and for you is just say it in English. Because if you do not know what this actually means, it does not affect what you're saying, right? You need to actually understand what you're saying in order to affect the chametz itself and to nullify any possession you have of that chametz. Very, very important. And the reason for this halacha is in case you forgot something. In case there's something that you possibly didn't see or didn't realize, or maybe you saw it at one point, but then you forgot and you didn't find it during the search. This makes it so that you're no longer responsible for those things necessarily. Let's end with Menorat HaMaor. Menorat HaMaor will continue speaking about the story of the Jewish people's redemption from Egypt. We're just at the very, very beginning part of this, right in the beginning of the first chapter of Exodus. We know that once Joseph died, we spoke about if you were listening last episode, we spoke about Jacob dying. This time we're talking about Joseph. Once Joseph dies, who was this great minister in Egypt and saved the Egyptians from famine and fed the Jewish people as well, making sure the world had food at this time. Once Joseph died, things began to change. So this is symbolized and understood and communicated through the Torah text in Exodus 1, verse 8, where it says, "And there arose a new king, Vayakom Melech Chadash," a new king arose. So, but there's an argument over exactly what really happened. There's an argument in the Gemara between Rav and Shmuel. Rav and Shmuel are two famous Amoraim who fight all the time in a good way, good fighting, debating. And they're called bar plugta or argument partners. They're always arguing together and learning together. These are some of the things we love the most in Judaism, these beautiful partnerships of learning that are built around debate. So here we see there are two different opinions of what this verse means. Rav interprets this verse quite literally and says, Vayikom Melech Chadash means there arose a new king, right? And so it's not the old king. It's a new king. It's a new person. So meaning Pharaoh died, the old Pharaoh died that Joseph knew, and now there's a new Pharaoh, there's a new king, and the king doesn't know Joseph, hasn't heard of him, whatever. Now, this is a kind of crazy idea because even if the new king didn't necessarily know Joseph himself, no one told him about Joseph from before after saving the whole entire country from famine for 7 years? Really? Everyone just seemed to forget about that? Okay. Crazy. Shmuel has a different opinion, and maybe for this reason. Vayikom Melech Chadash here is from, as Shmuel says, his decrees themselves were renewed. Gzeirotav nitchadshu. His decrees were renewed. So what this means, it was the same Pharaoh that knew Joseph, but that Pharaoh had a change of heart. That Pharaoh saw that there was a need to do something else and made these decrees that were very, very severe and paranoid against the Jewish people. And regardless, whether you think it goes according to Rav and according to Shmuel, you know that things changed after Joseph passed away. But it's important, whenever we see a machloket, whenever we see a controversy, an argument, it's really important to understand what is really being argued about. What is conceptually being argued about here between Rav and Shmuel? Right? Is this just a simple argument of factually what happened? I don't think so. I think it's a lot bigger than that. I think what Rav and Shmuel are looking at are what happens when Jews have this really good relationship with the secular government or whatever government they're living in, and things change. How do they change? And Rav says it has to be because, well, you were friends with one king, or you had a very good relationship, a very trusted and respected relationship with one particular king or one particular pharaoh, and now that pharaoh has passed away, and now there's a new one, and that doesn't, and of course, you kind of just start again. You start afresh, and you have to make a new relationship with this person. Shmuel, I think, is a little bit more severe. He says, just because you have a good relationship with the king at one point doesn't mean you're going to have a good relationship with the king at another point. We know that leaders kind of go with whatever's good politically for them at the time, and we can't trust that they're going to look out for the best interests of the Jewish people unless we are constantly representing ourselves, unless we're constantly creating that good relationship and reputation amongst the government authorities. And this is really important. How does the Torah talk about being involved with government? Of course, just because you're Jewish doesn't mean you can't serve as a representative or in the secular government. There's absolutely no problem with that. But from a Torah perspective, and from actually an agent of the Torah, so we're talking here about rabbis or people who are somehow representing the Jewish people in some regard or some way, when should they be involved with the government? Well, Pirkei Avot and Judaism is actually, Torah is very clear about this, that the real reason we should be involved with government is to create a good reputation for the Jewish people so that we can survive, so that we're safe, right? Which is why so often it's okay to create these good relationships, actually beautiful, so that, again, the Jews can be a trusted community in the country in which they're in, and we can build a safe haven for ourselves. The Pirkei Avot and the Talmud is much more skeptical about actual political lobbying on things that are not on behalf of the Jewish people. Maybe the Torah authority shouldn't be involved with this, what have you. There's still, of course, a debate about that in our world today, but they are much more sure that the reason that we should be involved with government is to create a good reputation for the Jewish people and to make sure that they thrive and survive in the country in which they're surviving, which is something that guides me every day in my own interaction with political officials. But I think between Rav and Shmuel, I think, just is saying to us in a much deeper way, you can't assume that you have a good relationship just because the king has been good to you or there's been a good Jew around who's sort of created a good reputation. That reputation has to be formed every single moment. It's daily work that happens of building relationships, of working together that the Jewish community needs to do to make sure that we're respected, that we're treated kindly, and that we're safe in the countries we find ourselves in. This is a responsibility of the Jewish people in which we should never give up on. Well, that's it for today, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Daily Derech. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to email me anytime at rmr@templeofaaron.org. Thank you so much for listening. There are so many people to thank, and you can look in the show notes for that. And also, if you want to know and see any of these texts in the original, we actually have that too. You can actually find that in our episode description. So look in each of the episode descriptions, and you'll find that information right there. Thank you very much. Have a great day, everybody.